Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays us from making another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. This week, homework assignments. The Byword starts now. Ladies and gentlemen, nerds, welcome to episode 179 of the Nerd Byword podcast. I'm Dave. I'm here with my buddy Kris, and this week we are doing one of our famed and fabled homework episodes. Kris has assigned me a comic book to read, and I have assigned him a comic book to read, and both of us had to step a little out of our comfort zone this time around. But first, as always, it is time for... All right, Kris, this is actually really a actual positive news story for a change. What have you got?
Yeah, so a gameplay, as of time of recording, a gameplay trailer was released for the new Indiana Jones game, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and it is reportedly set in between Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Last Crusade movies, so peak Indiana Jones era. None of the geriatric Indy. All love to Harrison Ford. I actually really enjoyed Dial of Destiny. Go back and check our review of it. And I go up for the one with Shia LaBeouf as well. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But this is peak. Indian is prime, if you'll forgive a sports reference here on a nerd-centric podcast. But gameplay looks great. It is switching back and forth between first and third person. And the big news, I think, coming out of this is it is a Microsoft exclusive game. It'll be on Game Pass day one. It is set to release this year in 2024. So it is going to be, it's marketed, it's developed by Machine Games, Bethesda, and is going to launch this year exclusively on Microsoft. And some of the Sony kids not too happy about that, even though that has been their calling card. So kind of fun to see. But everything looks great on this. I'm telling you what, first person punching Nazis in the face, Dave, that's going to feel great.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that very, very much. It's interesting because I watched the footage that was released and spent some time meditating over that a little bit because you can kind of see the backlash already coming, not just from the fact that it's exclusive now to Microsoft platforms, PC and Xbox, but also that it is first person. There's already been like some weird rumblings there. Now, obviously, given the Uncharted series, which is basically Indiana Jones inspired, and of course the Tomb Raider series, both being third-person action-adventure games, I can understand why they decided to go a different route. Also, Machine Games is a developer very familiar with developing first-person games. I think they were involved with the most recent Wolfenstein games, for example, first-person shooters. So they're definitely developing within their wheelhouse, which I think can only be a good thing in this case. They've kind of perfected their way of making a first-person game, and so translating that over is probably not too difficult. But yeah, there's already been some rumblings about, that. And I'm assuming a lot of that is coming from the Sony fanboy side of things, who are, what do the kids say these days online? Butthurt. That this is an exclusive on the Xbox side and actually looks really good. The main criticism leveled at Microsoft being that Xbox doesn't have a lot of good exclusive games. Well, here comes one, and right away, the nitpicky brigade has to come and try to find something wrong with it. Based on the footage I've seen, I'm very excited to play this, and I think I'm going to enjoy it a great deal if, the final game delivers what the early footage here is promising. So I'm totally psyched for this one. I think this is a good time. I'm a big Indiana Jones fan, going back to his prime. Can you imagine if they would have done like a sequel to Dial of Destiny, and you have a stamina meter like in Breath of the Wild, but it only has like one little pie slice in it because he's so old. Got to do a lot of resting in between taking actions, Yeah, no, I like this, man. I'm kind of excited for this one.
Dude, here's one. I remember playing and really really enjoying Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb on the original Xbox. So I'm very excited.
Oh, that game was good,
Yeah,
man. Yeah, yeah, that game was good. I remember that well.
yeah. So I'm very excited about this and very pumped. All right. Speaking of Microsoft exclusives, and if Dave is going to beat the drum for anything, it's physical media.
Yeah, I am. Ha. Sad story though. Here we are. If you like physical media, it looks like Walmart is slowly downsizing and getting out of the physical media game. Not completely, but at the very least, downsizing their video game section. Now, of course, it's funny the way the headlines for this are written. Thanks, media, for focusing on the wrong thing.
Who at Sony
Everybody's of
who at
course talking.
Sony wrote this article?
Who at Sony writes these headlines? That's exactly right. So they're focusing on the fact that the first game that Walmart is pulling is Starfield, Xbox exclusive Starfield. Now, there is a sort of vocal minority online that is very, very, I don't even know, negative, I guess, about
It's
Starfield. And so
strange,
they're
so
taking
strange.
this, yeah, yeah, they're taking this as another sign that the game is bad. But the way it's being reported right now is that Starfield is going to be one of the first games that is being pulled out of the Xbox section. They are going to discard physical releases of Starfield because it is a much better digital seller apparently. So they're going to go ahead and they're going to lower the price to 3 cents. And then do a point of sale block in their system. So if they forget to pull one and somebody tries to buy it for 3 cents, they're not going to be able to. And then they're going to pull all of those copies off the shelf and discard them. Now, this is supposedly the first step in a more far-reaching initiative. Rumors have been rumbling since last year already, actually, that Walmart is going to downsize its physical video game section as it's not a big moneymaker for them anymore since so many people are buying digital these days. There's also been some rumblings that they might go ahead and further downsize actually their DVD and Blu-ray section as well. So this is most likely a first step in a much larger move away from physical media being sold at Walmart. But because it is Starfield, of course, there's a large contingent online that has to say, see, Starfield sucks. Even Walmart is throwing the game away. But I think it's just, once again, sad because it's a larger indicator that physical media is slowly in the way out. You know, we combine that with the Best Buy story, where Best Buy is, ending its sales of DVD and Blu-ray discs. And you can just kind of see the trend coming along. So I don't think this is much of a call on the quality of Starfield and much more just a part of a larger trend that has been going on for a while now, Kris.
I have so much to respond when it comes to this story. First and foremost, I'm glad that I'm no longer a department manager at Walmart because this gave me PTSD in the inventory markdowns and inventory management of the job that I had when I was in college. Secondly, the Starfield haters, just get a life. That game is great. If you liked Elder Scrolls, if you liked Fallout 4, like this is, if you want to lob any criticism at Starfield, is it's incredibly derivative of those two games. Like it very much put me in the same mindset as like, what if Elder Scrolls, or what if Skyrim, to be specific, was in space? That's very much the vibe of Starfield. But graphically speaking, alone, this game should have been up for all those awards. The fact that it was left out of the Game Awards is a joke. I would put this right up there with next week's Nerd Commendation for me, as one of the most beautiful video games I've ever played. And it just so happened that both of the games, Starfield and the one that I'm teasing for next week, were released in 2023. Just absolutely spellbindingly beautiful. And I'm playing on a Series S, the quote unquote lesser unit. So it's just laughable to me. I think something that retailers like this need to come to grips with, the reason that a lot of people like myself are going digital, as well is not just for space. Like, if I get a better deal on a physical game, which one do you think I'm going to go with? And I've walked through the game sections at Walmart, and it's laughable. They don't mark anything down. Everything is full price. Why would I buy a physical game when I can go and see what publisher has a sale that's going on the digital store, and I can get it for $20 less? Why would I buy from Walmart? And Walmart is one of the prime candidates of kind of standing on their laurels and roll back as a day of the past, I guess, because what's the reason? Why would I buy from Walmart if you're not going to give me any kind of incentive? If I can get it from the same price at any other store, or even better yet, cheaper somewhere else, why am I fooling around with you?
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, obviously, it makes perfect sense that as a consumer, you go to the place where you can get a product at cheapest, and if that's online, if that's digital, then, you go for that. I certainly am doing that a lot with Steam games,
Dude, I'm going to
stuff.
Facebook Marketplace for Switch games because, like, why?
Like I'll purchase stuff via Humble Bundle, bundles, so I can get a ton of games at the same time for my Steam Deck, So I understand the concept. I tell you this is only partially nostalgia though, okay? Because I really think that there is something, especially in video games, there used to be something really special about a physical release of a game, and that's been don't get me wrong, that's been eroded for a long time. It's not just that the physical medium is starting to be phased out. But if you go back to like the early 90s and you purchase yourself a Super Nintendo game, right? You get this really cool box with really like unique box art. You open that sucker up and there's your cartridge, right? But then there's also a totally awesome instruction booklet, right? That explains
that's a fossil, Dave. That no longer exists. That instruction manual with like, I'm such a nerd because like I would go to GameStop or whatever, even back in the 2000s when I was in high school, I would go with my mom and I'd pick out a video game. And I remember reading the back of that as on that trip home, like it was a new novel that I just had, and I couldn't wait to get home and pop that sucker in there. And like I was reading the instruction manual that had character bios and everything, and we don't have that anymore. So what's the point of a physical game?
And custom art, as the other thing, like they hired artists to create custom art for these things. There were writers that would like further flesh out the story. To me, that entire package is not just about nostalgia, it's about value. There's something special about getting that. And the price of video game development keeps going up, the price of purchasing video games keeps going up, but the value, I think, to me in a lot of ways has gone down. You go and buy a game for a Super Nintendo, that game is done. You don't have to worry about a day one patch. You have a totally awesome box, you have the awesome instruction manual. The value of the physical medium in video games has gone down too. So at this point, it's been eroded so much that really all you've gotten is a disc. It's pointless at this point anyways, if you can just download it digitally. And you need a massive day one patch. I mean, you're going to have to download something anyways when you buy physical, right? So I understand why it's going away, but I miss the value of the old physical releases.
Unless, and not to be a broken record, you can chalk it up to corporate greed, because the only time that you're getting anything remotely of value is an overpriced collector's edition where you get a steel book or maybe a little statue figure or something like that, but you're paying $150 for that crap.
Yeah, and that's not worth it. I just want to play a video game, Yeah, so bye Walmart and some games, I guess. We'll see where that goes. Alrighty, folks, there you have it. That's it for Nerd News. Stick around. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to dive into some homework assignments that we gave each other. What weird crap did I make Kris read this time? Stick around. Ladies and gentle nerds, welcome back. It is time for our byword. And yeah, it's time for one of those long overdue homework assignment episodes where Chris and I assign each other some comic books to read. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to start off with Chris's homework assignment. It is no surprise, as always, that when I start talking comic books, some incredibly weird, obscure, or out there things come up, especially for people who are mostly versed in superhero comics. So, this time I assigned to Chris The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck by Don Rosa, a series that chronicles quite literally the early life and rise of Scrooge McDuck, Disney's richest duck in the world. The series was first published between 1992 and 1994 by Danish publisher Egmont, was eventually translated and published in the US between 94 and 96 by Gladstone Publishing. Don Rosa, artist and writer both on this, is working in a pretty established universe. If you're talking about duck sort of comic books from Disney, the two biggest names are Carl Barks, who preceded Rosa, and then Rosa himself. Barks just absolutely has a huge volume of stories that he's written about Scrooge McDuck, and in a lot of those stories he references things that he supposedly did in his life. And part of what Rosa did here is assemble everything that Barks wrote about Scrooge McDuck's early life and then write his story around those things to create a consistent continuity between the Carl Barks stories and the Don Rosa stories, which is a really interesting way to go. So I'm very, very interested to dive into some of the questions here that we have for each other when we do homework assignments, because the life and times of Scrooge McDuck loom large in my comic book story. It turns out that this is one of the first comic books that I actually read in a German magazine, Mickey Mouse Magazine, and I pretty religiously purchased that magazine, always hoping that they're going to put another chapter of Life and Times in there because I enjoyed it so much. So obviously, it's old. There's probably things that didn't age well, and I do still view it with a little bit of nostalgia. But I'm very interested, Chris, to get your take on this story. So, first question for you. What did you like most about what you read in the Life and Times of Scrooge
Well, I
McDuck?
think you already prefaced it. I think it's the nostalgia. I remember I'm very much a '90s kid, and I remember Ducktales. But what was really cool about reading this, I also need to preface. I think I got the short end of the stick here when it comes to length of reading. I gave Dave 12 issues of a modern comic, and I only read trade paperback one or volume one of the Life and Times. There's a whole nother volume out there. And I read for hours and I thought I was doing good. And I'd still quite a bit to read, but nevertheless, back to the question. I think the interesting thing here, though, if I'm all jokes aside, is what I enjoyed most is it, as you detailed in your pitch of this and kind of giving the background of the history, is this gave me so much more rich context to a character that I saw as just a grumpy old rich man. Like when you get to the DuckTales cartoon of the '90s, he's just this curmudgeon, this grumpy old guy, but kind of filling in the blanks of a life that was lived at such a large degree. I mean, and then you also add to the fact of you and I are both the history nerds that we are. Even though American history is not our first choice, I would imagine, but I think it's a really interesting and intriguing tale to be told here, and it's for the most part is very, very well done.
See, I'm really glad you say that because I feel pretty much exactly the same way about the story. I was a big DuckTales fan as a child, growing up. And really, DuckTales is basically the Carl Barks show. Like a lot of the stuff that Carl Barks, did in his comic books is sort of the inspiration behind what would become the DuckTales cartoon. And so then getting the background, the history of this long-lived character and how he became such a grumpy old rich guy is absolutely fascinating. And yes, it did totally play into my enjoyment of history there too. So yeah, it kind of checked a lot of boxes for me as a kid when I first encountered this. and it's really interesting because Rosa is, I believe, an American comic book writer. I think he lives in Kentucky. I think he's still alive. He's in his 70s now. Um, but really, it feels in a lot of ways like European comic books, right? And I was steeped into that as a kid, anyways. Stuff like the Asterix books, or Lucky Luke, right? So I was steeped into that kind of vibe, anyways. Not just American comic books, but European comic books. And this seems to be like this intersection of those two formats and those two notions. And I think I really loved it for that. All right, Chris, so what do you think could have been better? And I can almost predict a few of the things you're going to say.
Oh man, some of this really did not age well. The Native American characters or allegorical characters are pretty cringeworthy. The dialogue is not great, but I think the greatest sin of this first volume is the entire situation with the witch doctor. It's just bad. It's really bad. It made me feel viscerally uncomfortable reading it. And I think it's just really unfortunate, and even thinking back about when I first read it makes me uncomfortable.
Now, you may want to refresh my memory. The witch doctor stuff, is that the Bombi the zombie stuff?
Yes.
Yes, that is actually specifically what is not going to be reprinted anymore. Is I think last year, nearly a year ago, I think February of 23, Walt Disney came out and basically said that there are two stories of Don Roses that are not going to be reprinted anymore, and both involve the Bombi the zombie character. Which I think the modern DuckTales cartoon actually introduced the character and did a significant rework and redesign, and I think found a really good way of salvaging something that has not aged well is probably an understatement. Bombi the Zombie, if I remember correctly, was also a character that was first introduced by Carl Barks, and so in assembling this like timeline of Scrooge McDuck's life, Rosa kind of had to include the character in order to stay quote unquote in continuity, I guess. But yeah, I totally agree that that character is an absolute mess.
Yeah, and I think it's just I think it's a blind spot when you have, I mean, Don Rosa is a white man doing the writing and the art, and that's just a blind spot when you're looking at this released in the 90s, you said, so 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that feels weird to say. Something 30 years ago. And even to this day, Dave, I think there is a lot of glorification of Scotch Irish heritage. Like, that is, for white people, like being Scotch Irish is like the pinnacle of achievement, or like the Scottish Highland Games. Like, it's like this crazy, almost like epitome of white culture.
Yeah, I think Scottish more so than Irish, though, especially in the United States. I think there is,
Yeah, yeah,
if you sort of analyze the history of the Irish in in American history in particular, for a very, very long time, particularly in the 1800s, the Irish weren't even considered white. Like the
right,
Americans were
right.
very anti-Irish, and there was a very strong, like, like it's really hard to describe. Like whole political parties came up, and then sunk back down around the notion of excluding the Irish as much as possible. There was a very anti-Irish immigrant rhetoric in the United States for several decades. But yeah, I agree. I think especially in the last 20, 30 years or so, that pendulum has shifted significantly. But again, I think to a certain extent, Rose's hands are at least semi-tied here, when it comes to like this
Mhm.
idea of the Scottish being heroic, because that's something he inherited with the character. Like Scrooge McDuck
Right.
is a Scottish character, and he is the main character. So unless he's going to go through like making the main character of his story, not good and not heroic, then he's kind of stuck with that, right?
I'm not objecting to that by any means, but at what cost? You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely.
At
Yeah.
what cost? Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of, by modern standards, sort of cultural missteps in this, right? I think the zombie thing is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of that, the Native American stuff for sure as well. Um, when he goes to South Africa, that whole episode is there are things there that definitely are, by modern standard, huge missteps. I totally agreed on that.
I mean, like, if anything, like the only way that I could get through with it, with some of it, I was like, is the anthropomorphic, like, animal aspect of it. I was like, okay, he's a duck. Like,
Takes a little bit of the edge off, right?
yeah, oh, yeah, because some of that,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely, man. I totally understand where you're coming from. And encountering this and reading this as a kid, I mean, in the early 90s when this was being released in Europe, I was like 8.
yeah.
There's a lot of cultural context that you're lacking when you encounter that kind of stuff. So
Well, even growing up with Disney films like Dumbo, like, you had no idea as a kid, and then you
yeah,
grow up
the
and you
Jim
see
Crow
the
stuff
world
is the Jim Crow stuff is
is, whew.
it's
And
kind of
then,
smacks you in the head, when you
yeah,
realize what's going on there as a kid. You're like, wait a minute, yeah,
like
that's rough.
like a scene, like, if you're a kid and you're like, what scene stick out? That's not even a scene that, like, you remember off the top of your head, but then, like,
Yeah,
you revisit that, and it's like, my God.
really the thing that stuck out to me about Dumbo as a kid was Dumbo getting high on the supply, so to speak. Like that whole like dream sequence or whatever you want to call it is some of the
Yeah,
most psychedelic stuff I've seen in a Disney movie in my entire
yeah.
life. That one stuck with me as a kid. I was like, what was happening there?
Oh, Fantasia. I think we got flashed in Fantasia. That was one for me.
Yeah.
We
All
also
right.
had an elementary music class, and I was like, "Whoa!"
Yeah. They got by with a little bit more back in the day as far as what they showed in classrooms, I sometimes think. So what surprised you the most about this story?
Scrooge McDuck is in the same ethos of, like, a Pecos Bill, of, like, this tall tale. Like, it was this really, probably, if I were to revisit it, probably not very good. But, like, I used to be in love with, like, the tall tales of, like, Pecos Bill, um, Paul Bunyan, being a Midwest kid from Minnesota, like, Paul Bunyan, like, hey, that's Minnesota, man. John Henry, like, there was a movie called Tall Tale, and if I were to probably revisit it, probably wouldn't be very good. But, like, man, I love the crap out of that movie back as a kid, and so, like, that made this very easy for me to enjoy that Scrooge McDuck, who I had seen as just this grumpy old curmudgeon, had some of that joie de vivre of those tall tale characters that I loved growing up.
Yeah, that sort of tall tale approach I really liked as well. To me, looking back over some of the stuff, it was surprising how much um, Scrooge is just like I know it's an anthropomorphized duck, right? But it's interesting to me how human, I guess, Scrooge comes across in the story, right? Like that drive, where that comes from, how he grew up and how that informs him wanting to go out there and make his fortune. I think the thing that stuck out to me even years later, even before, like, kind of revisiting the story, is that moment when he finds gold, right? And he's holding this big clump in his hands and it's mud covered, and he like stops for a second, like he realizes if he washes this thing and it's actually really gold, that it's going to change everything, and he actually reflects for a moment, like, do I really want to do this? There's like a real mensch in there, in this like grumpy rich character that is like misery and stingy and doesn't want to share. Like, it's so interesting to take a character like that and, for a lack of a better term, humanize him. And I think that came across in a lot of scenes in the story that I really, looking back on it, I had not expected.
And I think the cautionary tale, you made me think of this when you were talking about how human this cartoon duck can be, is the being able to see the complete journey from youth into elder age, into adulthood, and into, you know, senior citizenship, and how he was admired by his family, his parents, his sisters, as this hero going on a journey to strike out for himself and to send money back to his family. And then unfortunately, like, the falling out that he had with his sisters because he got too into it, and how that damaged the very reason that he started this journey to begin with. That was
Exactly.
incredibly human, and probably a better answer for what surprised me the most.
Yeah, yeah. There's it's such a two-edged sword to revisit the story as written and as originally published, because like you said, there is stuff in there that is aged incredibly poorly, but then there are moments in there that are just such sheer comic book brilliance, you know. It's very much a two-edged sword these days. So what continuity or larger universe issues did you encounter trying to read this one, Chris?
Nothing really. I mean, this is probably one of the most new reader friendly things that we've covered on the show, because it literally starts at the very beginning. And so, other than the fact that I don't remember anything about watching DuckTales other than that he's a grumpy old guy and that theme song was Flames.
Oh
That's
man,
about all.
we need to
That's all I
do a
remember.
whole we need to do a whole episode about 1980s and 90s cartoon themes,
Yeah, dude.
or really just
Listen,
like,
our first episode, we literally just injected clips because that's what drew us to those things. Was the X-Men 90s theme song, was the Batman the Animated Series theme song, like, just
but man,
legit.
I'm telling you, man, especially like the Disney afternoon stuff, you know, Rescue Rangers, Tailspin, um,
Chippendale. Oh
so
my
good,
god.
man.
Ah,
DuckTales. I still ride for the darn
woo!
gummy Disney's Gummy Bears theme. I still ride for that theme. I'll still put that on Apple Music sometimes. That is one heck of a theme, you know. I miss that. I miss music. I miss real like TV themes. Like a lot of TV shows don't even really do themes anymore. Then maybe that's nostalgia talking again. But there was
Half
something
the
that,
time it's just a song that, like, by a regular artist, and so, like, even if it's a show you like, you can skip it because it's half the time you're doing it as title sequence. Like,
like that DuckTales track.
there's one every now and then, like Game of Thrones. I'll watch that title sequence every time. Like, even the season we don't acknowledge, like, incredible.
I think there's something that just sets the mood. Like when you watch a DuckTales cartoon and you got that theme, you're ready for it. You know, you're feeling it. You know, you're in the zone for that kind of mindset. And I think that is something that misses in a lot of modern stories. It's just like let's go ahead and just like set the mood a little bit. You know.
And correct me if I'm wrong. I might be reading too much into this, but there's something I think that's kind of interesting from a historical whatever standpoint of the 90s as a moment in time, and how attention grabbing it was. We had loud colors that popped. We had music and intro theme songs for shows that just grabbed your attention. Like, it's just kind of funny to think about all of that stuff. I'm looking at a nostalgia page right now, and we have fluorescent color pencils that transport me back, like Lisa Frank notebooks that girls had, and then you have, like, really attention grabbing theme songs like this, man.
Yeah, I think maybe that's part and parcel of the '90s, but I think the '80s did this really well as well. I had just you know, not to go too non nerdy for a second, but you know, there was a sitcom in the '80s that I recently, like a couple of years ago, rewatched in its entirety, and that's a Night Court. And this really like jazzy opening theme is really like I associated very strongly with that show, and it kind of set the mood perfectly for the vibe that that show ended up having. And then they made a remake, not a remake, but a sequel, I guess you could say, a reboot slash sequel
Right.
recently, right? And the first season was sort of the second season's getting better. I think they're starting to find their legs a little bit with that show.
I think we talked about it a little bit on this show.
Yeah, but then one of the things they ended up doing with this new season that just started is they basically removed the opening theme, right? They just hit like 3 bars from the opening theme and flash the logo, and they get into the episode. So the entire like 30 seconds of that opening theme to really like get you pumped for the show is gone. And that's like, I see that more and more happening. It's like, we got to squeeze one more ad in there to get a little extra money out of it. So let's just drop the theme. I think it's very cynical. I don't think the lack of themes, traditional themes like that, is necessarily a creative decision. I think it's very much hey, we can have a theme, or we can squeeze one more ad in here and get some more money. And I think that's exactly what's happening. As far as larger continuity universe things, this does very much stand on its own. But if you end up liking it, there is a lot of Don Rosa stuff out there. And then, of course, Rosa built everything that he did really on the foundation of Barks, right? And so all of that stuff is out there too in various releases. There's a lot of really quality Disney comic books, believe it or not. Even though you will occasionally encounter some, by modern standards, very, very troubling stuff. It's very... it's a jungle out there. Let's put it that way. How do you think reading this text will change your reading choices going forward? Can you see yourself reading some more Duck-inspired comics, Kris?
I might dive into the second trade paperback. I keep saying this when we have episodes like this, or when you make nerd commendations, but like I really have to, if you'll pardon my French, I have to really branch out from the cape. Like I superheroes are what hooked me as a kid, and what made it an easy transition when I like started regularly reading comics in my 20s. And so it's really, I almost feel like unfaithful. Like I feel like there's a measure of, I swear to God, I wish I was joking. There almost feels like a measure of infidelity when I read DC comics. Like I'm just like, well, what I'm going to forget what happens in the Marvel universe, and I need to hurry up and read a Marvel book. I'm so weird. I'm so strange when it comes to my reading habits, dude. I'm also very passionate, and I can get swept up in my emotions. And so I enjoyed Gotham Knights so much that I bought a year-long subscription to DC Universe Infinite and barely used it. It is now expired, and I read a couple. I read some Nightwing, because that was my biggest takeaway from the game. Is as I read 30 issues of Nightwing until he got shot in the head, and that was stupid. And then I tried to jump forward to Tom Taylor, but I fell off because I'm perpetually distracted. So I really just need to branch out and just. Like it's okay. I'm not cheating on anybody if I read other stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because I'm sitting here, recording in my home office, and I'm looking at my bookshelves, right? And I got three rows of DC graphic novels, right? And then I have 1 row of Marvel graphic novels, and then I have another 3 rows of just like anything that is not related to superheroes, So it's just like really, I think, I don't consider myself like necessarily disloyal when I read Marvel stuff, but Marvel is one of those things that really has to hit me the right way for me to get really into it, So I have a lot of DC
Same
stuff.
with DC. Funny you say that. That's exactly how I feel about DC. The reason Dick hits me is because it feels like Peter, and so I can have that connective tissue.
Excuse me?
There's a little bit of Peter and Dick.
I'm gonna go ahead and say that
Peter and Dick.
It feels like it. I think we need to make a shirt that says it feels like Peter. Okay, because
and Dick.
you just really kind of took me aback with that one.
We have another Attack of the Crones situation happening here.
Yeah, I think so.
People.
Yeah, but I think what I was trying to say earlier is that even though I have a very strong foundation with like DC comic books, I also, because I grew up in that European comic book market, um, it's almost like part of me is from a bygone era. Like, if you look at like the American comic book market, the romance comics, the Western comics, I I'm I'm much I am much more accepting of branching into something like that than I think a lot of people who came up on superhero comic books are, because I had my historical comedy in Asterix. I had my Western with stuff like Lucky Luke. I had the European tinged Disney comics. One of my favorite things to read when I was a kid was a Mickey Mouse series that cast Mickey Mouse basically as a private eye, right? So it's like Detective Mickey Mouse stories. So I have a love of detective stories in comic books, right? I have, because of that European upbringing, that infusion of those European comic books. I'm very into diving into other genres within comic books. For me, very much comic books does not equal superheroes, right? It's just a facet of it, right? And so it's not surprising that I have as many non superhero books on my shelf as I do superhero books. So I will say, if you're really wanting to branch out, A, I have lots of nerd commendations, but B, you really should, because there's so much good stuff out there that's not superheroes, um, and stuff that is so even something as huge as The Walking Dead. I think the comic book is so worth reading, especially compared to the TV show. There are very very cool things out there that have nothing to do with superheroes.
It's funny. If I can get through the new Dead Guardians, like that's probably the weirdest thing I'll ever read.
It was so good though. Come on, that is a great story. I don't even care, man. That was a great story.
I'm gonna color outside the lines here. What do you make of this Robert Kirkman stuff where he's getting sued by collaborators? You mentioned
I don't even know, man. I think, hey, when I first started trying to write in the comic book industry, I was naive as all get out, right? About the process and about the collaborative process, specifically with artists. And I am very proud of how I have evolved in that viewpoint, right? Because I was very much in my early 20s, the writer is the originator and he's the most important person, and blah blah blah. And I'm so glad that I grew out of that absolutely tone deaf view, right? And if you could talk to some of my most recent collaborators as I'm trying to get back into it, I think you would hear that I'm a very very collaborative person. And kudos to the artists who are in a visual medium at least as much, if not more important than the writer, because the how to frame these images and how to tell the story sequentially is the key to good comic book storytelling. um and so Kirkman being a writer, uh and getting sued by artists for not sharing in the profits, I guess, I think that's a very troubling thing. And it's definitely, if that is accurate, then obviously that is a totally merited thing, because those collaborators are the key to success in the comic book world. And so with a franchise like The Walking Dead, for example, which became a TV show and is still getting like a spin-off miniseries or movie or something still, they're going to bring the Rick Grimes character back, I think, in the live action version.
Is that show still on?
The show is over. The spin-off show is over, but I think they have like additional spin-offs coming. I think there's a spin-off coming that's like focused on Daryl Dixon, and then there's supposed to be some kind of spin-off that's focusing on Rick Grimes because they wrote off that character, right? Really, the television franchise is just a mess compared to the comic book. The comic book is just solid, good.
It's so
good
taxing.
Comics,
I think I watched like 3 or 4 episodes when the governor was like the big bad. And
yeah, I remember that. It was like season 2 or 3.
Yeah, it was. But now, like, kind of punting back and looking at it's exhausting. Just to even
the comic book is so much better. I think that's what it comes down to. But to my point, I think Kirkman made a goodly ton of money there, and if a collaborator has not been getting their fair share,
Mm-hmm.
then shame on him. He should have been justly compensated. But that's really something for the legal system to decide, not for me, right? Um, I can just say that I think the artists are an incredibly important ingredient of making a successful story, and any writer that doesn't fairly compensate their artists is on the wrong side of that particular issue.
All right, we're going to turn the tables here. Dave has read Moon Knight by Jed McKay and Federico Sabatini, issues 1 through 12. I was at a point where I was very disillusioned. Just to give a brief history lesson on how I found this book. It's very much word of mouth on Twitter, X, Twix. People were posting panels of this, and I was very intrigued by it. My son is very interested in this character and had read the first couple issues. And I was very disillusioned with X-Men comics. I was very hurt by the events of the Hellfire Gala that we talked about on the last episode. And so I was like, I was sitting there thinking, like, there's so many good comics out there, and my loyalty to the X franchise is not giving me anything in return. So I'm going to go read the good stuff. And for me, the first place I went was Moon Knight, which started in 2021. It's written by Jed McKay. One of the main pencilers is Alessandro Cappuccio. Dave, what did you like most about what you read?
This got shockingly deep, actually, particularly with the character of Moon Knight, and I thought it was really interesting the approach that McKay took here. In the first 12 issues, there's not a lot going on with Moon Knight's multiple personalities. I think at one point in one of the issues, there's like a shot that takes place in his head, and he's sort of pocketed, all of the various personalities and kind of locked them away, right? And so it's basically just Mark Spector for the first 12 issues, and you don't see another one of his personalities pop up until the end of issue 12. Um, and so what that afforded McKay to do with this book was to really dive into the psychology of the character of Mark Spector, like who is he, why is he the way he is, and why does he do what he does, and it's kind of a trope at this point, but he does have a therapist character that he goes to because the Avengers apparently demanded that he go to a therapist, which I thought was interesting. But we get really an interesting sense of a guy here who is still carrying the weight of a lot of bad things he did in his life. A guy who is carrying the weight of being bound to a god that he doesn't approve of, right? And so on the one hand, he's turned against his god, and on the other hand, Khonshu, this Egyptian god of the moon, he also is still continuing the mission, right, of protecting people who travel in the night. So there's a real interesting dichotomy in the character of Mark Spector. And I'm gonna be real honest. As far as Moon Knight is concerned, I have not read any Moon Knight comic books before this one. It's just never been really that strongly on my radar. And I'm aware and have watched a few minutes of the Moon Knight TV show on Disney Plus, but I never actually finished that either. So you could say in a lot of ways this was my first real exposure to the character of really spending any kind of amount of time with Moon Knight. And what I ended up feeling is that this is a very interesting and complex character. I think that McKay really nails something in the writing to make this character compelling. And I'm not going to stop at issue 12. It ended in a really interesting cliffhanger, and I think I want to continue this run on because I really now that he's actually going to play with the multiple personalities a little bit. I'm very interested how he's going to continue diving into the Mark Spector character, into the what you could probably say the dominant character is in the situation, and then juxtapose them with the other characters. I was really just interested in Spectre as a character, even the fact that for a huge chunk of the series he's never even taken his mask off, right? Because he can't bear to show his face, I think there's a really interesting character here, much deeper and much more interesting than I initially thought.
It's funny because um, the Egyptophile in me, like ancient Egypt, has always been one of my calling cards when it comes to history, and so Moon Knight, I gravitated towards quite easily when the Disney Plus series came out, and I enjoyed it more than most. Um, but this series was really interesting because of my own. We'll say it's a journey spiritually when it comes to being raised in a very strong evangelical background and becoming disillusioned with that upbringing, and it's really, really, really fascinating. And you and I have had a long discussions about spirituality and Christianity and faith and all that stuff. But I think it was really interesting to see that kind of put on panel in a way that I've never really seen before, with someone you are pledged to but have become disillusioned with, is really kind of fascinating to see develop.
Absolutely. Talking about the Egyptophile in you, did you ever listen to the great courses, History of Ancient Egypt by Bob Breyer?
No, but I am opening a tab right now. History of
Yeah,
Egypt.
he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's like a
Um,
25 hour, 24 and a half hour course on the entire history of ancient Egypt, and it is absolutely fantastic. If as a history nerd, if you're into that, there's a lot of really good, great courses content. But the history of ancient Egypt by Bob Breyer, I think, is like um, a class of its own. It's really, really good. He's a fantastic lecturer. I think you would really enjoy it.
it's funny. I've never been interested in going and getting a master's degree or anything, but I've enrolled in ancient history courses in like Coursera just to watch lectures, just because I love that stuff so much. Like I don't want the extra accreditation. Money has never been a motivating factor for me. Salary, like I just want to learn things about ancient history, and I've always been like an origin point kid. Like I want to know where things come from. Linguistically, that's probably why I fell in love with foreign languages. It's like I want to know where things come from, and so this was a natural transition for me. But following on to our second question, what do you think could have been better here?
Yeah, this is going to sound weird, but the character of Hunter's Moon, which is like this the other fist of Khonshu, in the first few issues, I thought there was a really interesting build. With him basically saying, "I'm coming to correct you," and you've strayed. And I thought there was a really interesting conflict brewing there, a really interesting juxtaposition. And instead, it comes to a head very quickly in the third or fourth issue, and Moon Knight basically just beats the snot out of him, and after that he's sort of an ally, right? And a lot of what was a really interesting conflict between the acolyte that strayed versus the acolyte that remains loyal gets very much just kind of pushed aside. Now maybe that is something that's going to come back in the back half of this run, because I only read the first 12 issues, but I was really disappointed that that was not further explored so far. I thought there was a really rich, fertile ground for an interesting exploration of that juxtaposition, and it has not yet come to fruition. Now, this might be something where I'm going to eat my words once I continue reading, but it just kind of swerved very abruptly. Like here he is, and he's going to try to correct him and put him on the proper path, and then boom, now he's an ally. And it swerved very quickly to the point where I think one of the issues took place during Devil's Reign, and like Mark Spector is in jail, and so that issue just focuses on Hunter's Moon basically stepping in and like being
As
being
Moon
his
Knight, yeah.
substitute, right?
Yep.
Like that's a huge swerve within the course of 6 7 issues, you know. So I was a little disappointed that there was not more exploration of that
I,
juxtaposition, I guess.
I can see where you're coming from, and I can tell you that there is more of that journey and that story coming in the subsequent issues, but I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think it was pretty abrupt, and I think there could have been some more stuff fleshed out there in the conflict between the two of them. But Dave, what surprised you the most about reading this?
That's an excellent question. Um, I think what probably surprised me the most is how new reader friendly it was. I think if I was looking in the at the issue numbers, I think legacy number was like 200 something for much of this, right? So there's a lot of Moon Knight that came before, and they drop a few references of him having been in the Avengers and the West Coast Avengers, right? So there's a lot of history there, and at the same time, I never felt lost, if that makes sense, right? Like everything integrated really well, and I felt perfectly comfortable just reading this story and not having to go and read like 20 other stories to make sense of what was going on, It was McKay did a fantastic job of balancing, like referencing Moon Knight's past and past adventures and stuff, and at the same time not lingering on it to the point where you felt like it was essential to understand this story. And I think that is a very, very hard is very difficult for a lot of writers and comic books to manage these days, to balance this massive continuity with the story that they're trying to tell and making it accessible. And I was very, very pleased that I didn't have to go and read 200 other issues of Moon Knight in order to enjoy this story.
It's funny because here's a peek behind the curtains, but you texted me like, I've never read a Moon Knight comic before. What do I need to know? And full disclosure, the only Moon Knight that I had read was the Jeff Lemire run that I previously nerd commended, and it wasn't anything like earth-shattering lore-wise, but it was kind of a great like one-off series of adventures and street level type of stuff. So I'm going to lead right into that next question. Were there any things that were just a bridge too far when it came to continuity or larger universe issues?
Well, I think the only thing that I struggled with a little bit is the former Avengers teammate that showed up. What was her name?
Tigra.
Or whatever.
Tigra.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that character.
More on that later. More on that later.
I'm not familiar with her history.
She's hot
with Moon Knight, right? So I didn't know. I didn't know how to feel about some of the stuff that was going on with her. Like she's there and she's supporting Moon Knight, but then she's spying on him for somebody, and I'm like, am I supposed to be really shocked at this? Is this supposed to be really out of character, or is this quite par the course? So I guess that was the only continuity issue that I wasn't sure how to take her as a character, and more importantly, how I was supposed to interpret her actions. Like, is this a huge betrayal or is this a nothing burger? I really didn't get a beat on that until the 12th issue when her and Moon Knight actually talk about it, right? And then I'm like, oh, okay. But leading up to that, I really didn't know how to take that whole situation.
It's so funny you say that, but we are definitely coloring outside the lines today. I don't know how this wasn't my news story, but Jason Aaron is taking over Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I have never felt more diametrically opposed with a creator with one title to another. Jason Aaron's Thor is one of my first nerd commendations. One of the first nerd commendations that you really took to heart and enjoyed as much as I did. And then you have his Avengers run, which the less said about that, the better. And so I think that Avengers run, which I purged through 20 issues, I trudged through 20 issues of that, I think, kind of gives some context here with the Tigra situation. But the less Avengers we get on TMNT, something that's very, very important to me, the better, and hopefully we can get more of that Thor stuff. But yeah, so there's not a whole lot of context other than Khonshu goes crazy and Mark is kind of the person caught in the crosshairs.
Yeah, I got that part. I guess what my problem really was just the character of Tigra, right? Like, what is her relationship to Mark?
Is her spying they're on West Coast Avengers. I think they're on West Coast Avengers together. I don't know.
So that like I said, McKay did a fantastic job explaining like the setup of the series and what came before without lingering on it. Like the context of somebody needs to keep an eye on him because he did some bad stuff. Like that, totally understood. I just wasn't quite clear on Tigra and how strong her relationship with this Moon Knight, and if her spying on him was some kind of large betrayal or if that's something part of the course for the character. It was just a little confusing until the 12th issue.
You've teased this a tad, but how do you think this will change your reading choices moving forward?
Long story short, I'm going to read the rest. Like, I'm going to
Yeah.
continue this run. And if it continues going as strong as that, I may go ahead and punt back and write and read the Lemire run as well because I like his writing anyways. Um, so I'm finding myself enjoying Moon Knight a lot more than I anticipated. There's something almost DC about that character. Does that sound weird to say?
Okay. So, number one, I want to point out I'm a little bit disappointed in you that you haven't talked about the best character in this run, and maybe because she hasn't been fleshed out enough in these first 12 issues, I can't remember. My sweet niece, Reese the vampire. I love her with all my heart.
I like her a great deal. I think she didn't really come into her own until right at the end there of what I read. I think that's when she really started clicking with me. She was kind of there, but then at the end there when
Just wait.
when she's about had it and she starts like
Mm-hmm.
going off a little bit. That's when I was like, oh, there's some more coming with her. So I think there's just some stuff that I'm missing at this point that I still need to encounter with her.
Right. Okay. So here's the second point that I'm interested in. One of the laziest comparison, in my opinion, on comic Twitter, Twix, is Moon Knight and Batman. I said it's like ramen and spaghetti are the same because they both have noodles. What do you make of that comparison?
I don't think he is okay. So when I said that there's something DC about him, I didn't mean at all that he's like Batman.
Right.
I don't see that. I don't see that at all. Right? I mean, if you have somebody wearing a mask and running around at night, newsflash, there's a whole crap ton of superheroes that do that. Right? I don't I I don't think that that is an apt comparison at all. I think the reason I find that there's something very DC about him is because street level characters in DC are all a little broken, if that makes
Mm,
sense, right?
yes.
Batman sure falls into that category, but if you kind of just go through the street level heroes, Manhunter, for example, definitely little broken. Renee Montoya's version of the Question, or even the preceding Question, Vic Sage, very much broken characters, right? There is something very broken in street level characters at DC. And then if you look over at Marvel, you have Daredevil, who's kind of fits that mold depending on what run you're reading, right? Um, and then Moon Knight is very much in that mold. But then you get to something like Spider-Man, who's very much a quippy, more upbeat kind of character for the most part, even though he goes through some serious crap, right? So to me, I think when I read very broken street level characters, it's very reminiscent of DC characters to me. There's something inherently always like complex, broken characters that operate as street level heroes at DC, and I think that's really in that way he has a similarity to Batman, right? But I think what comics Twitter Twixer there is talking about is very much superficial stuff, and I don't necessarily see that comparison at all.
All right, that wraps your review of Moon Knight, Dave. I'm going to hand you the keys to the episode again.
Back to the keys to the kingdom, absolutely. So, what did you think of Jet McKay's run on Moon Knight, and what did you think of the life and times of Scrooge McDuck? If you've read these books, sound off on social media. We are available wherever social media exists at Nerd Byword and individually at that Nerd Dave and at that Nerd Kris. Time for a quick break, and when we come back, it's time for our patented nerd commendations. So stick around. Ladies and gentle nerds, we are back, and it is time for us to recommend some good nerdy media to you. You know it as our Commendations. All right, Kris. It's Chip Zdarsky. It can't be bad. So what you got?
So I am nerd commending Avengers Twilight issue 1, which as of the release just came out this past week. I'm going to read the synopsis for you. Quote, in a gleaming new world of prosperity, Captain America is no more, but Steve Rogers still exists, floating through an America where freedom is an illusion, where the Avengers are strangers and his friends are long dead. But is the dream? How do you assemble in a world that doesn't want them, end quote. And listen, man, this is along the same lines of that Spider-Man through the ages. Oh God, what is Spider-Man? Oh, I'm blanking. Life Story. Spider-Man Life Story is what it was. It's very much Spider-Man Life Story. Like, I think what the cool thing about what Spider-Man Life Story was is in this Marvel timeline, what happens if time is a real thing? And so that's something that's played with here of what happens when the flagship character for Marvel Comics arguably the flagship character of Marvel Comics, actually ages, and the super soldier serum is gone, and you have a very Fahrenheit 451. You have a very V for Vendetta kind of situation when it comes to government and oversight, and there's curfew involved, and everyday people are getting lost in the shuffle, but you still have Steve Rogers, this paragon of truth and justice and doing the right thing, how that kind of collides. And that's all well and good. That's a fascinating story to tell. But Dave, the reason we are here today talking about Avengers Twilight is Daniel freaking Acuna, who penciled the second volume of Black Panther by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And as I have told many folks, that is my dreamscape. It is one of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced in the medium of comic books, and it is no disappointment here. You've got Alex Ross covers, so I mean, like, it's the best of both worlds. I highly recommend this first issue. I don't want to spoil anything, but I think this just is one of those rousing books that can get lost in the shuffle of pull lists and weekly releases and regular comic books. This is a series I don't want folks to miss because it's great.
I'm interested. Yeah. So Acuna's art is great. Zdarsky is a fantastic writer. I'm a little weary of like alternate universe, post-apocalyptic futures, and all that stuff a little bit at this point. I guess the only real question I have is, does Spider-Man die right away? Because every time Marvel does some kind of post-apocalyptic future, they have to kill off Spidey. Like, that's just like
I don't think if I remember correctly, I don't think Peter or Spider-Man of any sort features in this at all. Well,
maybe they'll
I can't
kill
remember.
later.
I can't remember. Don't quote me on that. Don't quote me on that. Actually, now I'm thinking about it. Don't quote me on that.
All right. Well, I'll give it a look, because really the selling point to me here is Zdarsky. Zdarsky has earned a great deal of goodwill for me with that Daredevil run. Like,
now that you mentioned that, I think Peter dies in this one. I'm remembering now. It's been a couple days. For context,
Marvel not killing off Peter Parker in a post-apocalyptic future. Challenge
for context. For context, Dave and I have been snowed in all week. We have not gone to work all week, and I have read a lot of stuff. I've played a lot of games, so it's been a minute. Yeah, I think, spoilers, Peter dies in this one.
Well, like I said, basic setup sounds interesting, although I'm kind of tired of like post-apocalyptic future kind of stuff. But Zdarsky's name on the cover is definitely going to bring me to the table, so I'm putting this on my list. I'm going to check it out.
All right, Dave, we are revisiting a previous Nerd Commendation, if memory serves.
Yeah. So I previously nerd commended Ace Attorney Trilogy, the first three games in the Ace Attorney series, which were originally released for Nintendo DS and then re-released for 3DS. Now we all know that these are, these systems are pretty much dead at this point, and so I decided to update my nerd commendation, if you will, because I recently came across the fact that the original Ace Attorney Trilogy has actually now been released on Steam as of April of 2019, and I was completely unaware of this. Now, I was a big fan of the DS and the 3DS and how it implemented the dual screen thing. These games were pretty much built for that dual screen setup, so I wasn't sure really going into it, how that would work. Kind of reducing it down to a single screen. So I purchased it and I installed it on my Steam Deck. And I have to say, I'm almost through the first of the three games in the trilogy, and it's flawless and seamless, and it looks gorgeous on the larger screen. It's still one heck of a game. So for those people who don't know, this is essentially sort of a visual novel, but with a heavy dose of like puzzle solving and investigation, right? As you work as a fictional defense attorney called Phoenix Wright. You're going through some very anime-inspired courtroom proceedings, which are broken up through with investigations where you go to crime scenes and the like and have to interview suspects, talk to witnesses, gather evidence. And then in the courtroom scenes, you're looking for problems in people's testimony, and you have to press them or present evidence that contradicts them in order to trip them up and come to the truth. The characters are all really, really interesting. The actual crimes are really interesting. It's very, you start off in the first game, particularly as like a very young attorney. You're brand new to the job, and so people underestimate you, and you can kind of use that a little bit to your advantage. And I really, really love this series. It's something very chill about playing these. The writing is really strong on these. The characters are all memorable. And so replaying this first game has been a real blast. And it works so flawlessly with just one screen. I was kind of surprised by that. And so I wanted to nerd commend Ace Attorney Trilogy. If you've never played them, they are available on Steam. I think they're also available on Xbox these days. And they're very, very playable just because they're older games that were developed for Nintendo DS. Don't think that these are bad-looking games by any stretch of the imagination or that the gameplay isn't fun. And it works fabulously on one screen. I'm a big, big fan of this series, and I think I'm going to finally go further, down the rabbit hole past the initial trilogy and dive into some of the spin-offs and stuff as well, because the gameplay loop of this is absolutely satisfying, man.
Listen, now that I'm back in the world of Switch, I am very intrigued by this. And so I'm already, as you're giving your entire spiel, I'm looking up, where can I get this discounted? Is that, to circle back, is it a digital version or a physical version? Wherever I can get it the cheapest, I'm in.
You're just a regular old bargain hunter. Alrighty, folks, there you have it. That's it for another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. If you like what you just heard, get on your favorite podcasting platform, drop us a rating and review, and subscribe so you never miss another episode. Also, tell a friend, tell a family member, tell your favorite fellow nerd. Talk about us at the comic shop. Let people know that we're out there, because we would love to gain some more listeners and bring our positive brand of nerdiness to a larger audience.
And as always, be sure to follow us on social media at Nerd Byword across all platforms, individually, that Nerd Dave and that Nerd Kris as well. And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.